Welcome everyone. As you're joining, please don't forget to select a language because we will certainly get questions in Spanish, and you English speakers will want to hear the simultaneous translation. So please pick English if you're an English speaker. Our Spanish speakers also know how to speak, how to find it. All right, we are live now on Facebook. If you would like to follow us on Facebook, you can by going to the Disability Voices United Facebook page and then sharing onto your page, which is what I just did. Okay, welcome everybody. I get a feeling we're gonna get a very large turnout today because this is such a hot topic.
Don't forget Koreans.
That's right, all the Koreans. The thing is, I know for sure that our Spanish and Korean speakers know what the heck they're doing. It's the English speakers who don't freaking know what they're doing. So that's why I feel like I need to always make that, you know, remind people that you need to be part of this. Okay, so we're gonna just remember everybody, there were still getting a ton of people coming in. So I'm just gonna give it a hold for a second. And I'm gonna text one of our speakers to see if she's joining. Okay. All right. Welcome everybody. In case you don't know who we are and what we do here at SDP Connect, my name is Judy Mark. I'm the parent of a SDP participant, and I am the president of Disability Voices United. We're an organization directed by people with disabilities and family members, two of whom you're going to be hearing in conversation today in our topic. Before we get started, I just want to remind, we've had so many people come in just the last few minutes. I just want to remind everyone, if you're an English speaker, to pick your language, go down to interpretations and choose English. Okay, so before we get started with the topic at hand, I just wanted to let everyone know this actually concerns somewhat of the topic. That DDS yesterday finally issued a clarification in their frequently asked questions, their FAQs, talking about the spending plans. I just want to say to those of you who didn't believe me, and you know who you are, regional centers, I have been telling you this. Please, I don't make poop up here, guys. So one of the big questions was, can conservators or people who are powers of attorney, who are parents of adults, are they able to become paid service providers or independent facilitators in the self-determination program? And I knew the intent of the DDS directive on this, that in fact they should be allowed. I knew this because I had been in many discussions with them about it. And yet regional centers, almost all of them, were ruling that people with parents or whoever conservators were not allowed to be paid. So I had been saying it over and over. I'd been talking to local advisory committees, even my own, and I said, that's not true, ask DDS. So DDS finally came in and told everybody what's happening. And I'm just gonna take a moment and share my screen and go over this particular FAQ. You can look in the chat, and Ed has put in the chat the link to frequently asked questions. So that link is going to take you to this page. Okay, so it's terrible. So like, I can't give you a direct link to the spending plan or to this piece. Unfortunately, I have to give you this whole page. So if you scroll down and you go to spending plan here, then you scroll down from spending plan. There's this question, are there limits on who can be paid to provide services? So a legally responsible person cannot be paid to provide services. So that's where DDS was interpreting that as, not DDS, I'm so sorry, regional centers were interpreting that as conservators, but conservators are not legally responsible people. There's a very big difference. They're court appointed. The court is really legally responsible people. But who we know are definitely are the parents of minor children and a participant spouse. In some cases, a guardian of a minor child, such as another relative, will be legally responsible caretaker if a court has determined they must provide care to the minor. So that means that siblings, adult siblings who are not the guardian of a minor child can be paid. That is a question that people were asking. Yes, they can be paid. Grandparents can be paid. All right. So here's the big question a lot of you asked. Can a parent who is the conservator of an adult consumer be paid to provide services? Yes, they can, because a parent is not a legally responsible caregiver. They are appointed by a court. The same question has come up. Can a person who has a durable power of attorney over an adult be paid to provide services? Yes, they can. So it's very, very clear from this. There's no like gray areas. I actually had a mother reach out to me saying, I'm going to remove myself as conservator for my son. And you know, and get my husband in. And it's like, no, don't go doing all that. Everything's going to be okay. The other really important clarification that they made is around natural supports. So you remember that in this document, in this guidance that was issued not a long time ago, but a couple months ago around spending plans, they talked about how one of the things that should happen is that this SDP participant needs to consider natural supports as they're developing their spending plan. But what we're hearing is that in some cases, not all, but in some cases at some regional centers, they're saying to parents, so let's say there's something in the spending plan about like a karate class. And some regional centers are saying, or summer camp, you know, that is a parent's responsibility. That's a natural support. You should pay for it. That is not the definition of natural supports. This definition of natural supports is actually in the Lanterman Act. It's not, has nothing to do with self-determination. And what is very clear is that natural supports are people. They are not summer camp. They are not karate classes. They're not an iPad or a trampoline. They are human beings. They are human beings that live in a person's life naturally without being paid to do so. So they are family, they are friends, they are neighbors, they are co-workers, they are fellow students. Those are natural supports who are going to help provide service, not traditional services, but who are people that want to be in this individual's life and can help out without getting paid to do it. The key thing that you should see here in this definition is these individuals may choose to help you, but do not have to do so. Their help is provided without charge to you. So they do not have to do so. They are voluntary. It is really important for you to realize that natural supports are voluntary. No parent of an adult should be forced to do something for that adult, or I should put it the other way. No adult should be forced to have their parents be their natural support, is a better way to put it. You could ask Tim, he has natural supports in his life who help him on top of the paid staff that he has. And none of those people are his family. They're not his brothers. They're not his parents. So those are the critical pieces of the new direction. I also think, you know, even though this is not new, it's kind of important for you to remember that the regional center does not approve the spending plan. They review the spending plan. This is the Department of Developmental Services here. It's not me, it's not DVU. This is the Department of Developmental Services. So participants develop their spending plan, not the regional center. It's the participants, and they can get support to do it. In fact, I think it says it up here. Yes, support is available. Lots of people like your independent facilitator, your FMS can help you. Participants develop their spending plan and includes the services needed to implement their IPP. After the participant develops their plan, the regional center reviews, not approves, reviews the spending plan for compliance with state and federal law. This review includes verification that the identified goods and services are eligible for federal financial participation. So that's that list of definitions of services we've talked about in previous SDP Connects. And they are not used to purchase goods or services available through generic agencies, just like in the traditional system, that providers are qualified and that participant choice regarding who provides their services is respected. That's really, really key. Okay, read that, bring that to your IPPs, print it out, frame it, put it on your walls. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. We can get to questions about that after, because I think that a lot of what I just talked about, first of all, there shouldn't be any questions about it. And second of all, it should be, I think that a lot of it is really quite obvious and plain language. So the topic today that all of you are here for is really to hear about how to find, hire, retain great employees to help you through the self-determination program. And I'm going to hand it over to oh wait, Tim wanted to say something. Go ahead, Tim.
I just want to add to our topic that we are having tonight about hiring staff. Many of my past staff that helped me before became my natural support, and they are not getting paid at all.
That's really great. It's the same thing with my son's life, is that we have natural supports with supporting him or previous caregivers. So, and now they're just friends. Okay, so I'm going to hand this topic over to our staff. Molly Kennedy is our self-determination program fellow. Tim Jin is our assistant director of communication rights projects, and they are going to run this meeting. So go right ahead. I'll be standing by, but I'm going to listen in.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Hi, I'm Molly. I work for DVU as the self-determination fellow, and today we're going to talk about hiring your staff when you're in self-determination, and what are the opportunities, what are the things you need to be aware of when you hire someone, what can be the challenges. So today we have Victor. Could you just introduce yourself quick, Victor?
Sure, thanks. Victor Lira with Aviana Healthcare. Been involved in self-determination almost since Judy helped to get the law passed, on working on the work group and everything. And we're an FMS provider as well as traditional service provider, and been in and around the system and serving clients for the better part of, I think, 16, 17 years now, almost 20. So definitely, where my heart lies, and really excited to kind of help however we can, whenever we can. So thank you.
And Sandra?
So I'm Sandra Mccoy. I'm with Empower Person-Centered Plans, and I also have an adult son who lives independently with supports that I'm supporting as well.
And then last but never least, Tim Jin.
Tim types to communicate, everyone. You probably figure that out.
Hi, everyone knows me. No introduction needed.
Absolutely. Okay, Tim, we are gonna start with you. What did it take to start to identify staff that you would like to hire under self-determination? What were your first steps to hiring staff?
Tim, would you like us to go to a second question while you're typing your answer to this? Yeah, because that's going to be a complicated answer, I think. So
Okay.
Molly, why don't you go to the next question?
So Sandra, how do you, before you hire staff or recruit staff, you have to determine what you need in the ways of services provided, the skill set you need. How do you go about determining that?
Well, first you write the goals that you need to achieve. And then you write that what's needed to achieve those goals. So in my son's case, he's pretty happy going to Taco Bell or Del Taco for bean and cheese burritos 3 meals a day. But he really needs to learn how to cook, because if he can cook his own bean and cheese burritos for the same price as 2 bean and cheese burritos, he can get about a week's worth. And then he can spend that money on other fun things like movies and going to Wild Rivers if it opens this summer with season passes. So there's learning to budget was one of his goals. Learning to cook was another one of his goals. Oh, and now you have to clean up after you cook. So he needs somebody that can help him with all of those things. And then he can't drive, so he needs a chauffeur to take him to whatever his activities are, and to the grocery store. And so it's writing the goals first, and then that's the job description for the person you're going to hire, is what is needed to support those goals. Hopefully that answered
And
your
how
question.
did you, once you were ready to recruit people, what did you do? Did you have people in mind already, or did you do a wide recruitment where you sent out job announcement? How did you do that?
So after writing a basic job description that included the how much per hour the person would make, that there would be mileage reimbursement included, and how many hours, because there's different shifts. So, you've got the Monday through Friday 9 to 5 shift. And in my son's case, shifts are different for everybody because their needs are different. Then he has a 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock need. And then he has weekend shifts and so on and so forth. So then, so we had a couple of people we knew we wanted to hire, but we had a lot of people we did not know who they were going to be. So I created my little advertisement and went, the first place I went to is, my son has Down syndrome, was the California Parents of Down Syndrome Facebook page. And I posted the ad there, and I ended up with a mother of a 4-year-old with Down syndrome who has been fabulous, and she cooks. And so she's really doing a great job teaching my son to cook. And I ended up with a sibling of somebody with Down syndrome, a young man who was 19 years old, and he's turned out really good. But I still needed more staff. So, I asked family and friends, and, nobody knew anybody at the moment that was available. I asked the people we just hired. They didn't know anybody at the moment. So then I contacted the local colleges, and contacting the professors over the departments, the special education and the psychology departments, or even an area that the person's interested in, find a professor there and ask them to share the job description with their students. And we ended up with a student from UCI. And there's, the other places people can look though, Next Door Neighbor app, because that's people that are in the city that in the same city that you're looking in. Other disability specific Facebook groups, even the Disability United DDU Facebook group for self-determination. There's care.com, there's Indeed, but really, your network is bigger than you think it is. You just have to let people know that what you need.
Great. Tim, are you ready? Okay.
Staffing was the hardest part of my self-determination, and it still is. Trying to get the word out is the hardest. After you get the word out, and interviewing a new possible people is very time-consuming. I was thinking about this the other day. I have to adapt all of my employees every day. Some staff I'm very formal with, and some staff I'm very easygoing, but they all know me very well. As Sandra mentioned, hiring all different types of people is great because they all contribute in different ways.
Great, Tim. Tim, I'm going to give you another question to get ready for. Here's the question for you. How do you work with your FNS when you are employing staff? Will you be able to answer that? And while you're doing that, Victor, can we talk about, because hiring staff is not just paying someone, it's a lot more technical thing, and there's legal things that everyone needs to be aware of. Could you start addressing, or could you address what you need to be aware of when it comes to hiring staff around regulations and liabilities and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, Molly. Well, I'll do my best to see if I can't get it all banged out. So yeah, just starting from the most simplest straightforward thing, in order to be able to hire somebody, they need to be legal to work in the United States. So they gotta either be a citizen or have a green card, right? And they have to be able to, obviously produce the documentation they need, which is usually a state ID, driver's license, and or a passport, and a social security card in general. There are other documents that you can submit as well, but essentially those are sort of the foundation, right? So you find your person, and then you're going to want to refer your staff person to the FMS sooner than later, because then the background check has to be run. Now, this is a background check that's mandated by the state, and they have to go get a live scan, and then they'll take the live scan forms from the FMS, and usually the FMS will help to facilitate to let them know where to go. And then they go and they have their live scan performed after they fill out the forms and they submit for the live scan. Now, pre-COVID, live scan results used to come back a little bit faster. Kind of now we're at the tail end of COVID, but things still tend to be a little bit backed up. So it's probably 2 to 4 weeks to get those back. Could be longer if you've moved around a bit, or there's something maybe in the background that might cause a little bit of concern or something. Good point. Who pays for the live scan? The live scan is paid for by the provider on themselves. It's considered a condition of employment. And that's actually in regulation, that they have to go ahead and pay for that themselves. And then the results of that live scan go back to the state, and then they inform the FMS, the person is clear or they're not clear. And there's, maybe something that came up that they then can appeal to get resolved. We have seen appeals on live scan background checks take as long as 4 to 6 months. So you just have to be careful. Just real quick on the live scan, there's a question that why do some FMSs require it, some do not? It may depend on how the FMS interprets the regulation, but essentially the regulation is pretty clear, and we've gone back and forth to DDS on it to make sure that we're in alignment and compliant, and that anybody who's going to be providing personal care or intimate personal care service has to have a live scan done. If, for instance, you're going to hire somebody on an hourly basis, even to do transporting, there's no personal hygiene, there's no dressing, bathing, anything like that would be considered personal care or intimate personal care being done. So for instance, that person would not need to get live scanned, for instance. That being said, not to get too much in the weeds, but we actually perform our own background check in addition to that one, just because we feel as though the live scan doesn't necessarily cover all the bases that we want to make sure we cover. But generally speaking, if somebody passes their live scan, they're going to pass the other background check as well. But that may not be required by all FMSs. So again, you just kind of have to call and inquire about that. But in the meantime, right, the person has submitted their onboarding packet, whatever form that takes, with the FMS to the FMS. And then the FMS, again, processes those documents. So they get them into their database. Again, they make sure that, they have their documents so that they're legal to work. And if you're going to be providing if you're going to be providing respite services specifically, which is, I believe, 310 service code under self-determination, the regulations still do state that the person has to be CPR first aid trained, as an example. Now, does that mean that you still wouldn't potentially get a break if they provided some other type of personal care or companion type service through self-determination? No, you might, but if it's not called respite on the spending plan, then that regulation would not apply. But if you're doing community integration or one of those other things, socialization training, things along those nature, those actually don't have that same requirement. So then the person, let's say, gets onboarded, live scan is clear, they're ready to go. Assuming everything else structurally is sound and ready to go as far as between the regional center and the county department, and spending plan and all that kind of good stuff is all dialed in, and you've got all your staff, you're off to the races. At that point, then again, you just need to be mindful of your staff. And for instance, how many hours are they working, right? Because if you schedule them for overtime, or you use them to cover shifts potentially that some other staff is missing and they go into overtime, you do have to pay that overtime out of your budget, right? So that's something. So anything over 40 hours a week is going to be considered overtime. Absolutely. There's other considerations such as, discrimination. So not that any of us plan on discriminating against anybody, but you do have to be careful in how you talk to people, because while the person is going to, be providing personal care service and or service in the community, and according to whatever the person-centered plan was with those goals and outcomes that were kind of previously discussed, you want to make sure, obviously, still though, that there is that kind of semi-professional relationship, essentially, even though they maybe feel like part of your family, but you can't, if, for instance, make disparaging comments or make certain inferences, certain things like that, because there's kind of, HR considerations to be had, along those lines. As well as, I'm trying to think of some of the other more common things.
Did you talk about the difference between co-employer and
Sure.
sole employer, and what you have to have if you're a sole employer, the liability and that kind of stuff?
Sure, absolutely. So with the co-employer model, we kind of refer to it more as more of the plug and play. If you have received, a parent choice or employer of record style service, whether it be respite or personal assistant in the past in the traditional system, then it's similar to that, in that you can hire whomever you want. And then again, you can fill out that packet, submit it, get their documents in, go through live scan, and then they're ready to go. because you're going to be piggybacking on the administrative structure that the co-employer FMS is going to be providing. So we already have insurances, we already have workers' comp, obviously, and all those sorts of things. And so you're able to just kind of, put the person in and then get them up and running. On the sole employer model with regards to getting workers up and running, you still submit the same type of onboarding packet as far as that goes with those documents in the live scan piece. But you do have to take on certain other liabilities, essentially, in that, the workers' comp policy is your policy. So, if something happens, then obviously the FMS should be able to hold your hand and guide you through that process. But you would be a little bit more directly involved in that since it's your policy, as it were. With sole employer also, though, you do get the maximum amount of choice and flexibility. We've had certain clients that we worked with that, wanted to potentially hire somebody where we're going to be more conservative, right? Because it's our insurances that are kind of on the hook, as it were, and assuming the risk. Whereas if you go to sole employer, you get more flexibility and you can kind of push the envelope a little bit more. Like, somebody has moving violations, but you want them to transport. We may not be comfortable with that, but as a sole employer, you could push that person through potentially and say, no, I still want to hire this person, and I believe they're going to be just fine. Well, that's great. Then you get a little bit more power and control with respect to that as well. Also, flexibility in just more general terms. And if you wanted to set up certain, payment requirements or even overtime requirements and things, we've seen that come up as well with certain budgets and people that want to kind of have that maximum flexibility to be able to do some things like that, that maybe where you either have the constraints or we're unfortunately not able to do that, or if there's a little bit more risk involved, we may be more risk averse in those types of scenarios and situations. So you just sort of have to weigh it out and then talk it through, both with the FMS, hopefully your independent facilitator, of course, some of the representatives from DVU and things, and try to figure out what works best for you, yourself, or your loved one, and kind of, choose the best model. There's other considerations from a cost perspective as well. With workers' comp, you always want to ask what the workers' comp rate is. Traditionally, workers' comp for sole employer has been a little bit higher than what it is for co-employer, because, you don't really have a workers' comp history potentially in the sole employer model. So then you tend to get a little bit higher rate. That being said, you always want to check the rate with the FMS to ask them exactly what it is, because if it's not that much different or that much higher, or even if it's maybe even the same as a co-employer, then maybe that's the one that you want to do that and take that model instead. Because again, all of the costs, remember, come out of your budget. So all of the taxes, the employer-based taxes, as well as the workers' comp and everything, and any associated costs all come out of the budget. So you want to be really mindful of that. But if you've gone through and built a spending plan, then hopefully that's very, upfront, front and center anyway, because you've already been able to see the numbers kind of play out as you plug them into your spending plan.
Okay, great. Tim, are you ready?
I work with my FMS very closely. Whenever I have to hire a new person, I immediately let my point person know at the FMS so they can do the paperwork and live scan. It could be a 2 weeks process or even up to a month if the person didn't do their employee packet right. You have to be on top of things with FMS. Whenever I hire a new person, I almost have to speak to my point person weekly or daily to make sure there is no error with their documents. I only train new staff after they are fully hired because I want to make sure that all of the insurance in place, just in case they get hurt, even when they are receiving training. And for those training hours, I make sure that my new employee is getting paid.
Great. Okay, Sandra, how do you train staff when they come on?
So, people come with their own experiences, and some know more what to do than others. I mean, honestly, the ones who are moms are easier to train than the ones that are college students. And I start off with a manual. I've created an employee manual that goes through the things they need to know about my son, because my son will manipulate anybody who doesn't know what he is and isn't supposed to do. And so first, it takes a couple of hours that I'll go through the employee manual. I'll go through his home and show them where things are that they need to know. We have a daily schedule. There's a cleaning schedule for the week. And then there's a Google Calendar that everybody needs to download on their phone so they can see what's happening that particular day. And then my son has ABA staff. So we enlist the ABA provider to do a lot of the training. And they have a meeting every week over Zoom with the staff and, talk about ways to motivate my son. It's very important that they know punitive things like saying, you're not going to get to go to the movies if you don't clean your room first, or whatever the thing is that will cause a meltdown. Instead, we go to the movies sooner if you get your room done, or you can go ahead and have popcorn at the movies if you get your room done in the next 20 minutes. So it's positive motivations rather than punitive ones work best. So those are the types of things that need to be trained. And then when things come up, they have their weekly meeting with the ABA provider, who can then help them problem solve things like that too. So really, if we didn't have the ABA provider, I'd be spending a lot more time doing training than I am personally doing, but not everybody has that. So sometimes you do have to spend more, personal time training people.
Tim.
Victor, I have a question for you. What is the difference between a contractor versus an employee? Can you go more in depth, please, on this? A lot of people are getting confused.
You guys ask the best questions, and we get this a lot. And unfortunately, we have to disappoint some families sometimes and some providers, right? A contractor is somebody, when you hire them, then you don't have to, as the employer, you don't have to pay any taxes, right? Because you pay them the whole amount, they take the money and then they pay their own taxes, right? That's great. If you're a doctor or a lawyer, a plumber, an electrician, somebody along those lines. But in the state of California, in its infinite wisdom, they've passed some pretty strict laws.
Independent facilitator.
And independent facilitator. Good point, Tim. Exactly, right? Because generally speaking, right, these are people that set their own schedules, set their own rates, and that already have an established industry, business, do advertising and all those sorts of things. If you want to, really take a look at it, and this is what we do when somebody comes to us and they say, hey, I want this person to be paid as an independent contractor. We find out, okay, what are they going to be doing? How are they going to be doing it? All right. And then we go and we validate it against what's called the ABC test. The state of California has an ABC test for independent contractors, where it's very prescriptive. In other words, they tell you exactly what it means. And if you fail the A, the B, or the C, and you don't meet all of the guidelines, you're an hourly employee. Now, the vast majority of us in the United States of America are all hourly employees, right? You get paid so much per hour, and you have to, have taxes deducted, and we all pay income taxes and all that kind of good stuff. And along with those employer-based taxes as well, that have to be paid on the employer's behalf, that get deducted from the budget. So I see the appeal in wanting to preserve as much of the funds as possible for services. However, the vast majority of the time, you're going to hire somebody and they're going to be an hourly worker. Apart from, like we said, an independent facilitator is a great example of that, or other people that have specific sort of trades that they engage in. Or, if you hired, this is the one I guess I like to use. If you hired somebody for transportation and they were an Uber driver most of the time. You could probably get by and say that person is going to meet the ABC test because they're an Uber driver. They have a history of being an Uber driver. They're an independent contractor already with Uber. Therefore, I'm engaging them to provide the services that they provide for their own business, for themselves, for me as well, So that would be another example of an independent contractor. Now, if I'm hiring somebody and I say, no, they're just going to show up a couple of times a week and they're going to spend 3 hours a day on Mondays and Wednesdays here, and we agreed that I'm going to pay them $25 an hour for some, PT assistance or something, that's an hourly worker, even though you may not want them to be, potentially. So again, if you want to sort of enlighten yourself, you can just, Google, California, independent contractor ABC law, and you should see the link pop up there. And actually, I can pop it in the chat. I have it on my shortcuts.
Okay,
I just put it in, Victor.
Oh, look at that. It's like magic.
So, I'm gonna ask Sandra and Tim that to be ready to answer this last question. What are the benefits of hiring your own staff? And while you think of that, Judy, do you want to ask any follow-up questions?
I just want to add to what Victor, it was just talking about in answering your previous question about whether a person is a independent contractor or an employee. And this question has come up a number of times at our SDP Connects. It was why it was so important that it was one of the major features that we're talking about today, because I'm hearing families and participants complain about their FMS, asking things of them, doing things, it's like the FMS, they're not letting me have this person come in as an independent contractor. Okay, the FMSs do not write labor laws in California. The labor law, you should know that California has some of the strictest labor laws in the country, if not the strictest labor laws in the country, particularly on this issue. And so you should know that when a person is doing direct support care, meaning they're staffing directly with that self-determination participant, there is no possible way that they could ever be an independent contractor unless they work for an agency. So let's say you decide your direct support professional is going to work, instead of hiring people directly, you're going to use an agency like a supported living agency, or you're going to use a respite agency. Then the respite agency is taking on ensuring that those workers are actually employees. So they're still going to be employees. They're just employees of the respite agency or the supported living agency. It's not like that's changed them to an independent contractor. It's just somebody else is taking on that liability for them. So, please don't blame FMSs, independent facilitators, regional centers, or me about our state's labor laws. We all have to abide by them. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't independent contractors who can be in your life. In my son's case, he has direct support professionals who are employees, and then we have a range of consultants. We just like Sandra's son, we have a behaviorist who does training on occasion, maybe once a month or so, based on her availability. So it is her job. She is an independent contractor who does her own thing with us. We have independent living specialists who provide training. We have a nutritionist. We have an exercise person, like a personal trainer. These are all people who are independent contractors because they are providing 1 hour every once in a while, and they have their own companies where they provide that service on a regular basis. That's very different than the person who is here all the time on a regular basis working with my son for the core reasons why that we establish the hours, we are their bosses, we tell them what to do. So I want to make that very clear. Something that I have to say, I got a text. So you might have asked this, Molly. So, but just in case you didn't, did anybody talk about the requirements for liability insurance, health insurance, and workers' comp? Did we talk, I think I heard you say workers' comp at one point. Did we talk about health insurance as well?
Victor, did you talk about health?
No, I didn't talk about health insurance. And another thing, actually, thank you for bringing that back up. In addition to that would be also overtime with co-employer FMS agencies. So something to be aware of, right, that we've run into, and we still run into it from time to time, and we constantly have to have those upfront conversations and be transparent with folks, is that if you, let's say, you know Judy, and she's got a great provider, and she's with ABC FMS, and you want to work with ABC FMS as well. And you know what? You're going to use that provider for 20 hours a week at your house too. But that provider's already doing 30 hours a week at Judy's house. Now they're going to do 20 hours a week at your house. That's 50 hours total, right? The FMS, in theory, is on the hook for the 10 hours of overtime, the overtime premium. That can't come out of anybody's budget because Judy didn't schedule them for overtime. You didn't schedule them for overtime. But by law, they have to be paid overtime because they're working under the auspices of the business, the tax ID number of the FMS in order to be able to receive their paycheck. So we run into that as well. So just something to be mindful of. Again, your FMS is not trying to be mean or rude. It's just that you can't incur extra costs, and have to basically eat the overtime when you have, multiple care providers serving multiple families at the same FMS. Generally speaking, our policy is we don't really allow that at all, just because when we have allowed it in the past, then what we usually see is, something comes up, maybe there's a crisis, whatever the case may be, or they just get really comfortable and happy and you want to work more hours. And next thing you know, their people are going over and they're going over, and then it becomes, an issue. So, unfortunately, that's something on the co-employer model that you would not run into on the sole employer model. On the sole employer model, again, you are the sole employer. There's no, co-employer insurances and or kind of risk sharing there that happens in the co-employer model. With regards to general liability insurance and health insurance, so the Affordable Care Act says that if you have 50 or more employees that are working at least 30 hours a week, I won't get into look back periods, but just call it that. Generally speaking, then you're responsible for providing healthcare coverage to those folks as well. So then that's something else that you need to be aware of, in that it's possible that your worker at some point would become eligible for those, and if they do, then if they tap into actual Affordable Care Act healthcare benefits, that cost would also come out of your budget. Just so you know. Because the co-employer FMS is going to have more than 50 workers on their payroll because they're issuing checks to workers for different employers for their families, and so then that could also be a concern as well. So again, these are just some things to kind of think about and ask those questions when you're talking to the FMSs and trying to figure out which model do I want to go with. There's pros and cons either way. Maximum control and flexibility with more liability, potential higher costs, or more plug and play model, maybe easier to adapt to, but at the same time, there's going to be some restrictions there, and also, potential, depending on how involved the FMS wants to get with your hiring, that, and how risk averse they are. So just some things to consider.
Great. So I just want to wrap up and let Sandra and Tim, I want you to go last, Tim, but
Victor,
tell us
on
why
the sole employer model,
it's great to hire your own staff.
Victor, on the sole employer model, how does the background check work? Is the FMS still liable for that?
Yeah, so with the FMS, no matter your model, if you're going to be doing those personal care services with intimate care and things, then you have to get a background check through LiveScan per the state of California. That you can't get around. Now, if you do go sole employer model, and then you don't have to get like an additional background check. Like I said, we do our own additional, National Criminal Database check, as well as, Office's Inspector General check, just because we want to be a little bit more thorough just to make sure that everything's being caught. But that would not necessarily come up if you're going to do sole employer model because it's not required. So therefore, it doesn't have to be done. Now, it can be done if you'd like it to be, and the FMS offers that as a service, then it becomes optional essentially at that point.
Okay, great. So we have a lot of questions in the chat. So I do think we want to get to that. So Sandra, just shortly, what is the benefit of hiring your own staff?
The main benefit of hiring your own staff over using an agency is you have consistent staff. My son knows who is showing up and that they know him and he has a relationship with them. One of the hard things when he was with an agency is people call out sick. And so some random person would show up at his door and he didn't know who they were. And he's supposed to open his door and let this person in and assume they do work for his SLS agency, which could be dangerous because it could be somebody just posing, and really just having relationships. The other thing, the agencies tell people don't get too involved, don't get real close with the people, keep it professional. And we don't want that. We want relationships. We want people to be close and be invested and want to stay and have fun. And that's the biggest benefit. And being able to tell them what to do without having to tell a supervisor to tell them what to do first.
Yeah. And Tim?
Freedom. Since I started self-determination almost 5 months ago, holy cow, time is going by fast. I have the best support that I ever had because I can handpick who I want to help me. I also have the same 7 people helping me, and they all know me in different ways.
Excellent. Well, I'm gonna thank Victor, Sandra, and Tim. I thought you guys provided a wealth of information. I think people will still have a lot of questions, and I'm gonna turn it back to Judy to move forward into questions, open it up to all questions. So Judy, thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Great job, all of you. So interesting. We have 8 million questions in the chat. I am going to assume we will not get to them all, but I want to give folks a couple of ways you can ask questions. So Ed has been tracking all the questions in the chat and she'll come in and start asking them to our speakers. Some of the questions are related to what you're talking about today. A few of them are unrelated, but that's okay. We try to get to as many as we possibly can. There will also be some questions that are written in Spanish or maybe asked verbally in Spanish. And so we will use our interpreter for those. In addition to putting your question in the chat, you're welcome to use the raise hand feature by going down, clicking on reactions, clicking on raise hand, and it'll look like what I just did. So I'm happy to call on you and give you the ability to unmute yourself. But why don't we get started, Ed, with the millions of questions in the chat?
Certainly, certainly. So the first few questions that we have are in regards to the updated FAQ.
Okay.
So that's a bit of a throwback. Lourdes asks, so a parent who is the IHSS provider can be paid by the SDP? And on the heels of that, a very similar question, Christine asks, can IHSS parent providers be paid to be personal assistants to an adult consumer if that's outside of the IHSS hours per day?
Yeah, so that IHSS thing is something that I'm going to write a note that I need DDS to put something in writing on that. So I have never actually seen it in the FAQs or anywhere else, but it's not what I've heard it. Maybe Victor can even weigh in on this. Where I've heard some regional centers are restricting is whether an IHSS provider can be the independent facilitator, because that word independent, they cannot provide any other services in the IPP. So in my opinion, the other services in the IPP are basically regional center funded services, but some regional centers are interpreting it as also including IHSS, since they claim that generic resources are in the person's IPP. It's not all regional centers who are saying this, number one. And one regional center told me that DDS directly told them this. I have never seen it in writing. In my opinion, regional centers don't actually have the right to private information of who is the person's actual IHSS provider or not. So I'm not really sure where regional centers are getting the information that the parent is the IHSS provider. So that is certainly one way to handle it, is that you're not required to provide that information to the regional center. You're not even, by the way, required to tell them how many IHSS hours you get, even though I think that is something that you should certainly reveal. But I don't know, have you heard it differently, Victor? Or maybe you haven't heard
No,
it.
it's kind of along the same lines. I think we've heard very similar to, you know, some yes, some no, although more, you know, kind of lean towards the no because of the regulation and having the IHSS provider be a generic resource, like you said, and in the reg saying you can't provide any other service, but you are providing an IHSS service, so they interpret it. So generally speaking, I'd say it's more no on the whole.
But that's, for me, I've heard it just to be the paid independent facilitator.
Paid, right? You can be the IF, but as long as you're not paid, then
Right.
it's fine.
Right.
You can totally be the IF.
Right. But what if you're going to be their employment coach, or you're going to be their driver? I mean, that's different. There is no separation. There's no independent requirement for that. So I believe that would be fine. Go ahead, Ed.
I'm sorry, I realized I had remuted myself. Next question is from Natalie. What about the certification of the budget, but not funding the budget due to HCBS assessments being necessary?
So there are no such things as HCBS assessments yet. There should be very soon. There probably should have been 5 years ago, but there is no, in the traditional system, there's no HCBS assessments being done by regional centers right now. So that's why I find this a little bit curious. I have to tell you that I have seen, just like with the other, I'm often part of seeing early versions of directives that will come out from DDS. And there is going to be a directive. It's very straightforward on HCBS compliance. It's very, very clear. They actually name very specific service codes in the traditional system that will be subject to some kind of questionnaire. It's almost like a self-assessment that they have to show the regional center how in self-determination these traditional services are being provided differently and in an integrated way. So that means that, let's say you have a service that is like supported living. There's no self-assessment. If you're using a supported living provider, there's no assessment that needs to be done, because in the traditional system, they are considered compliant with the new rule. But let's say you're using a social skills class, you're using a day program, and those are often in congregate settings, and you're using a traditional service provider, and they will have to do an assessment. If you're using a provider that is not vendored with the regional center, I do not believe that they will be, they need to be assessed. At least under this new, this directive that should have been out like 2 months ago by DDS, but it hasn't been put out yet. So once again, here I am providing you with information that I know will be true when it comes out someday. Regional centers may disagree with me, but I've seen the draft of this directive, and I believe that will be the final version that will come out.
Fabulous.
There's some on this, there's some of this call that shall not be named that have also seen copies of that directive, and they're welcome to chime in by raising their hands. But I cannot reveal who else has seen it. Good, Tim.
Ever when staff go on to different careers, you don't want to cancel them out unless they are horrible. I recruited many good people from referrals from my past employees because they know what I am like, and in their own circle, they might know someone that is a good fit for the open position. For example, I just hired a new staff 3 weeks ago and they got the referral from a backup staff. Unless you burn the bridge with someone that quit on you or you let go, it's always important to keep in touch with them.
Thanks, Tim. Go ahead, Ed.
Absolutely. Our next question is from Lynn. Do I go back to the regional center to add independent facilitator services to the individual budget? We weren't given funds for an IF in the individual budget. Or do we rearrange the spending plan and do without some services for this year?
So the law very specifically states that you will not be given additional monies to hire an independent facilitator or an FMS. So your budget would have never been increased for that anyway. So it's certainly not worth going back to have a meeting on your budget for that. I don't know, Martha, who was it that asked that question? Was that Martha or was it somebody else? Because somebody just raised, no, it wasn't. Okay. So it's certainly not worth going back. Let me be clear that if you have not yet entered the self-determination program, you have funds outside of your budget to help you hire an independent facilitator to help you transition into the program. That is very different than having an independent facilitator who helps you over the years once you're in the program. So, but your budget will never be increased to hire that person. It has to be part of your overall funding. All right. So you will have to go back and look at your spending plan, change that plan to include the independent facilitator, and then and you'll have to reduce other costs.
Thank you, Judy. I have next up a question from, let me tab back here, Connie. If your child has protective supervision hours from IHSS, it can hurt your SDP budget because it will be lower than SLS funded from the regional center because the wages of IHSS workers are lower than regional center funded direct care staff. IHSS nor the regional center will fund a person to hire, train, or supervise IHSS workers. Is it considered an unmet need if I need someone to hire, train, and supervise the IHSS workers?
I can't imagine it would be. That would shock me if it were. Remember, your unmet need is based on your needs in the traditional system. So the IHS, there is nothing in the traditional system which would give you funds to train your IHSS workers. There's just nothing in there. So you have to look like, what does your life look like in the traditional system? Are you what are the kinds of basic services that people get in the traditional system? And that is what makes up your budget. Now, there's certainly ways to get unmet need in there, but it's not going to be in by looking outside of what traditional services are.
And there's a clarification question in the chat asking if the funds you mentioned, the transition funds, are only for a person-centered plan, or could they be used potentially in addition to that?
Yeah, there's a range of things you can use your funding for. So it's to develop your person-centered plan. It's also to help you develop to advocate for you to create your individual budget. So it might mean that your facilitator might come to an IPP with your regional center and help advocate for you on the issue of unmet needs. It also can be used to hire someone to help you identify services and supports in the community and figure out how much those items would cost and put together a spending plan for you. And then finally, they can help advocate for you around the spending plan in case you have any issues in presenting your plan to your regional center. So There's a whole range. So, we've talked about this in previous meetings. You have up to $2,500 to spend. You shouldn't be spending $2,500 to create a person-centered plan and then have nothing left for the spending plan and not identifying services and supports. I said this before, my son has one of the best person-centered planners in the country. And we, I think, spent $600 or $700 on her creating the plan. Should not be $2,500. Please ask folks. There's very few super experienced people in our state. There's a couple because they worked we had a pilot project for 25 years. Some of those can say I've done hundreds of plans, but anybody who tells you that they're highly experienced are not giving you the truth, because we've only had this program for a couple of years. So no one should be getting the kind of high levels of hourly rates that that you can seek for a person who's been doing this for decades. So I know that not every independent facilitator is happy that I'm saying this, and I've got a huge amount of hate from a couple of weeks ago. But I need you to know, I'm here for the participants. I'm not here for the people who get paid to be in our system. And you as participants need to inform yourself on what are appropriate hourly rates for the people you hire and the level of expertise and experience that they have. We're all learning together. We get a lot of great IFs on these meetings, and they are all learning at the same time because the rules are adapting and changing and modifying on a regular basis. So, please be thoughtful and wise, and don't get taken advantage of. That's really, really important to me.
Thank you, Judy. I have a question, and then perhaps we should turn to Martha. I have a question that's also along the lines of what does or doesn't get funded by the SDP. And this question is broadly speaking about tickets. Does the regional center fund tickets for events still? The exact parameters of this question are: the regional center says an anonymous person can't put entry tickets into a spending plan for staff, not the individual, because they needed to see the law or code that would allow for that.
That makes my head want to explode. Because I was also part of the drafting of that particular guidance as well from DDS. So DDS was very, very clear in their guidance on spending plans that you cannot buy admission tickets to purely entertainment events for the participant. They were silent about the staff being paid. I specifically asked them to say the staff can be paid, but they don't do that. They would not do that. The reason why I can promise you that staff can get paid is because they get paid in the traditional system. They get this paid for. So some of you who've maybe been in day programs have gone bowling or gone to the movies, and the staff go into the movies, the staff go bowling, but they are not paying out of their own pocket. Those costs are being borne by the actual agency that is that they're hired by, and though they're using taxpayer dollars to pay for that staff to go to an amusement park or to go to a bowling alley. Those rules have to apply both in the traditional system and in the self-determination program. So, I would say go to your regional center and tell them Judy Mark said, but that and a dime will get you 10 cents.
I'm getting a question if you know the code, and I'm going to say there's almost no way, right? There's
no code. Oh, you mean the service code for the spending plan? It would be community integration. It would be just there's just like general community integration. And it's in this. By the way, it's in that guidance.
She says they wanted the WIC code. I don't know what that is.
Oh, the Welfare and Institution Code. I don't know what they're talking about, but there's no WIC code for this. Tell them to call DDS and DDS will explain it to them. Tell them to call Nancy Bargeman. I can promise you Nancy Bargeman's on the same page on this.
Would you like to move to another text question?
You know what? I see Amy Westling in our participant list. And Amy was actually at the meeting where Nancy was very clear to say that staff can get paid for. I don't know, I hate to put Amy on the spot, but Amy is the head of the Association of Regional Center Agencies. Tell them to call Amy. She heard the director of DDS actually say this. So that's tell them not to call me because they don't care about me. Tell them to call Amy.
Would you like to move on to another text?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have a question from Me Yip Lee asking, can the IHSS provider be paid to be a respite provider for an adult consumer?
I think so. I mean, I've never seen anything specifically saying anything about IHSS providers in writing, whether what they can or cannot do. So it's really, the only time I've ever heard it, and I've not heard it from DDS, I've just heard it from regional centers. I think it's really important that, you know, they can do anything except for the independent facilitator because there's no independent requirement. Sandra, did you want to answer that as well? Go ahead.
Yes, my son's IHSS provider works so many hours with IHSS, then he changes hats and he becomes SLS and gets paid through the self-determination program. So an IHSS person's pay is coming from IHSS, and then his pay for self-determination for SLS is coming through the FMS. How's that for a mouthful of acronyms? So yes, they can work for, it's like having two jobs. You have two different payers, but if they are getting paid for IHSS, they at the same moment in time or the same hour they're working, they can't also be paid to be respite in the same hour because IHSS does not allow any padding of funds. So you might, they only get $15.50 an hour, depending on the county you're in. And so if you want to give them an extra $5 an hour to, keep them around or whatever, that they're in a union, so they can't do that. So does that, hopefully that answers the question.
There's actually something in the chat that Karen Mulvaney put in, but I don't think it's correct. Could you look at it, Victor, on this? It says the joint employer rules may kick in for an IHSS provider also employed under STP for the same client, but the employers are different. The employer—
Who said that? Who said that?
Karen Mulvaney.
Karen Mulvaney, you get the golden star.
Really?
Yeah. So here's
for IHSS.
Here's the problem. Especially in California, right? We always talk about how difficult it is in California, but in general, if you're providing IHSS services and then you're providing respite services, let's say, but when you're doing your IHSS hours, you're doing pretty much the exact same thing that you're doing when you do respite services. It's the same worker, getting paid from different sources, yes, but it's the same worker doing the same job. So then actually, yeah, you qualify for overtime if you go over 40 hours. In theory, that worker could come back and go to you and say, hey, you client employer and FMS, if it's co-employer, both of you, you owe me overtime plus penalties and interest and file a labor claim. That's true story. That if you actually go to applied self-direction, they have like a whole thing on this. But yeah, that's where I learned it, was through applied self-direction.
Okay, so that is so silly. So are you saying, let's choose a totally different field. You are a waiter at Applebee's and you're also a waiter at Olive Garden, and you work more than 40 hours a week. They're both being waiters. You get overtime?
But you're working with two different clients, right? So that's the thing. So if you work with the same client providing essentially the same service, that client is the employer, right? It doesn't matter where the funding's coming from. The client is the employer. So you go into overtime. So in theory, we haven't seen it yet, but you could have a labor claim.
I
Karen
had the
Mulvaney
same
has-
discussion with my FMS on this.
Yes, you did, Tim.
So Karen Mulvaney, I wish I could put a little gold star on your question. I don't think that's something that is allowed in this, but Monica Rainiak is our human resources person at DVU, is expert on this. Go ahead, Monica. Oh, wait, you have to be asked to.
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to pipe in that if the SLS services were provided by an agency, you wouldn't have that problem because you would no longer be the employer, you know, if they were an outside agency. And like Victor was saying, that's where the problem comes in, is that you are the IHSS employer as well as the FMS, the employer for FMS purposes.
The other thing you could do is to make sure you have a job description potentially like IHSS. Okay, that's fairly understood. But if you have a separate job description for what the person's going to be doing, and it's distinctly different from IHSS, then you would be able to kind of lean on that as well. You could say, well, during IHSS, you're doing all these sort of, personal care things, meal prep, some cleaning, maybe taking some vitals, whatever the case may be, that's allowed under IHSS. And when you're, doing these other hours, you're actually doing, SLS services, which is goal driven because we're learning these different skills that we don't do when you're in IHSS. We're practicing this, we're practicing bus and managing money and doing all these other things that are skill goal driven activities that is distinctly different tasks that you do from when you're providing IHSS. If you do that, then you can make the argument that, yeah, in IHSS, I do this. And then when I work for them doing this SLS or some other type of service, I do this. That's how you would, in theory, then be able to differentiate there and not potentially run into the overtime labor claim until somebody tests it.
Very helpful. Thanks, guys. Go ahead, Ed.
Our next question is from, hold on, let me scroll back up here. I'm at the bottom. Is from Lydia. It is in Spanish. Lorna, I don't know if you're in the document. It just has a little anonymous mink at the top of the Google Drive. So I'm going to pop this question into chat. Folks, please don't use chat while this question is getting translated.
Well, I mean, I will definitely let Victor, because Victor at an FMS is similar to GT, that you're at the mercy of the live scan / Department of Justice system to get the results. I know that in some cases the results come very quickly, and in other cases it can take many, many months if somebody has some sort of red flag in their background. It does become a little problematic. So Victor, do you have any advice here?
I don't. I mean, they could ask GT for the contact at DDS directly who handles the fingerprints so that they could go to the source to see if any results have come back there at that level. But if GT hasn't received the fingerprint fingerprints yet, there's not a whole lot they can do to approve the worker to be able to go ahead and start, working.
Yeah, I mean, we heard stories. I don't know if Rick is still on, but, oh, he's not. We heard stories that, if somebody had a DUI, 20 years ago, and it comes up with a ding, when they were in college, and it comes up as a ding now. I mean, that's obviously quite problematic. And it could take sometimes 6 months to get that resolved. So, this is something we've been talking to DDS about. DDS is not actually in charge of the criminal background checks. It's the Department of Justice, the State Department of Justice. So we do need to figure out a way to break down those barriers. All right, Tim, did you want to say something about criminal background checks or something? Go ahead.
This is a tricky question for Victor.
Great.
What about overnights and when they are sleeping under IHSS versus self-determination when they are up in the morning helping me and they are not sleeping? Will I have to pay overtime to them?
So this is tricky, but we talked about this, Tim, when we talked about your scheduling and your workers and making sure that we accounted for everything and all the numbers lined up. If memory serves, Tim, and you can chime in on this and tell me if I'm right or not, we sort of like what I was saying before, we distinguished the duties they were doing when you were asleep versus the duties that they were doing when you're awake. So you have a job description and you make sure to explain to the care providers and your staff that, hey, when I'm awake, obviously I have a lot higher need, with certain things, and whether it's food, transportation, fun, going skiing, whatever you might be doing at the time, during the daytime and during nighttime hours, really it's more of, I might wake up, and if I do, I might need some assistance depending on not, what I need to do during the middle of the night or not. And that's pretty much about it. So I think the way that you worked it was you have IHSS hours doing some of the night hours, since it's, lower pay and, less intense. And then you used your SDP personal care hours and you distinguish those as a different type of worker and staff and task and job description that you need during the daytime hours. So in theory, your night person that's coming back to me does overlap and get into the daytime potentially. So they need to help you when you wake up, but that's when they flip and then they go to self-determination, staff worker, and then they assume that new job title and they have those other duties that they need to do. And then they come off of IHSS because your IHSS is only being used for essentially that night maintenance. Does that sound about right? Yes, nailed it. All right.
I see that Connie Boyer, you wanted to ask a question. You need to unmute yourself. Connie, you there? All right, she may not be there. Go ahead, Ed.
Certainly. So my next question is from Stacy. How is health insurance for caregivers who work full-time dealt with in the co-employer model?
Go ahead, Victor.
So it gets a little complicated, but essentially the ACA has what's called a look back period, and the FMS co-employer can determine what that needs to be. It could be 3 months, 6 months, or a year. We have a 1 year look back period potentially, so that, the person works for a year, you look back over that year and say, okay, they worked at least 30 hours a week and now they qualify for ACA benefits, at which point then you would be notified, hey, there's ACA benefits here that are going to be incurred. You have to offer them to them. And then if they were to take you up on that, or essentially take themselves up on that because it's required by law, then there's going to be premiums involved and all those sorts of things. So then the worker would have to pay their premium, and then the other portion of those premiums would then have to come out of your budget.
Got it. Connie, go ahead. You seem to have muted.
Sorry about that, Judy. We know that group homes, they recognize that people are different in terms of their skills, their need for higher skilled staff, more intense staff. But with SLSs, there seems to be no recognition of that in terms of higher need. At least some regional centers do not recognize. I also know that some regional centers now are considering what they call enhanced SLS for maybe people who have high behavioral challenges. My question is, they haven't started this yet with DDS. Can you claim or assert under SDP that that person has a higher level of need, meaning that they need a higher skilled person, DSP, to work with them, therefore increasing the budget? Would that be considered an unmet need? Or do you still have to just go to health and safety waiver, which has been suggested?
Yeah, so neither answer is going to be, neither path is going to be easy. Everyone knows a health and safety waiver is a nightmare. It can only be requested by the service provider, the SLS agency, cannot be requested by the person or their family member.
Right.
It can sometimes take a year or two to get approved. So that's not a fast way to go.
Right.
So there's many people know that there are all these new rates that are going to go into effect starting on April 1st. The rates, based on the rates study, have varying versions of supported living based on a person's needs and their support needs. And so the question is, can you say, look, there's going to be this enhanced, a higher level supported living in effect? Can we qualify for that, have that higher amount go into your budget? And you can definitely try, Connie, and I 100% suggest that you try. The question is that they're likely to not do it without clear direction from DDS. And the reason I know this is because back on July 1st of last year, the state put back into effect social and recreational programs. So theoretically, people in self-determination should have been able to get funding for social rec put into their budget starting last July 1st. And nobody has succeeded in that yet, because regional centers are waiting for what are the rates going to be, what is the calculation going to be, so that we can put that into the budget. So there's a lot of dragging of feet at a lot of places, specifically because DDS has been slow in getting out specific directions, which I assume will be the same. Another thing that I've heard that relates to this is that in last year's budget, they also allowed for supported living services for people who still live at home with their parents. And that was supposed to go into effect, and it still has not. So no one has been able to add that to their budget. But I do know of people who've requested it and are getting it, even though because they are making a very strong case through unmet needs. So I do believe that it is possible. It is possible. I'm looking at the clock. It's 5:58. So do we have one last quick question, Ed?
Oh, yes. Let me just pick one at random. Here's a really interesting question. I've had several variations on it. Can a speech therapist be an independent contractor?
Most definitely, yes. So anyone who is a therapist who sets their own schedule. So a speech therapist would say, I have an opening between 3 and 4 on Tuesday. That is very different than you saying to a direct support staff, you need to be here from 9 to 3. Like, you are clearly the boss setting the hours. That is very different than a psychologist, a speech therapist, a physical therapist who says, this is when I have an opening and you are going to come to see me. Speech therapists generally have their own sort of company, their own LLC. They're filing their own taxes. So they are definitely an independent contractor versus those direct staff who work with you. So it is 5:59. I want to thank Tim for pulling this whole thing together today. I want to thank Molly for chairing it. And I want to thank our guest speakers, Victor, Lyra, and Sandra Mccoy. We really appreciate it. There was just a lot of knowledge that came out today, a lot of good questions that are answered. We will be back in 2 weeks. We know you had many more questions, but we will be back in 2 weeks with another edition of the SDP Connect. And we hope you will join us. Thank you to Lorna, our fabulous Spanish interpreter, and Helen, our fabulous Korean interpreter, who hear me talk over other people and get frustrated. So I apologize, and we thank you all. Take care, everybody.